They have had now the longest buildup, this window, this run up of time to expansion than any other expansion franchise in NWSL history. So they've had the longest amount of time to essentially get their stuff together. And it's kind of in limbo, it sort of feels like.
Bos Nation is back in the conversation, and they're back at the top of our news circuits. Not always the best thing you want to hear. So Boston is the 2026 expansion team that is set to be the 15th NWSL team, but there's been a lot of different failures and setbacks, including their failed launch campaign of Too Many Balls, the initial name and branding of Bos Nation. Last month, we talked about the club saying that they've heard all the complaints about it. They're listening to the fans, and they're going to take plans to correct that. Now, Sandra, according to recent court documents, NWSL's Bos Nation, the debut could be disrupted thanks to potential stadium renovation delays. There is a lot here that we have to unpack. Sandra, what the heck is going on?
Too much, honestly. Like, that's what it feels like for Boston, not to like make a pun off of the too many campaign, but it is sort of feels like too much at this point. And I think what raises the anxiety meter around it a little bit is that 2026 is coming a lot closer than I think people anticipate. We're about to ring in a new year, 2025, and for NWSL Boston to date, they have had now the longest buildup, this window, this run up of time to expansion than any other expansion franchise in NWSL history. So they've had the longest amount of time to essentially get their stuff together. And it's kind of in limbo, it sort of feels like. And I think that's part of the frustration or the ongoing frustrations within this franchise. Because even though they announced their plans initially in September of 2023, part of their expansion plans included this long-term project, like a rehab project for the White Stadium within the Franklin Park area of Boston. And so they launched a few renderings about those plans, what they were going to look like. Understandably, there's concerns around such a massive undertaking, right? Public versus private funds, but this is mostly all private, 50 million through the ownership group. The Boston mayor was on board. She was very complimentary during the launching of this expansion deal. But ultimately, White Stadium is owned by Boston Public Schools. So, despite kind of falling into some disarray, I mean, it's still used. It's primarily used for football, for soccer, track and field events, in addition to just like other community uses. And so there's also like some underlying question marks around that. What would that mean for the future of Bos Nation? Like, how would that look when we're talking about primary, secondary uses? And what would that make a Bos Nation? Would that make them tertiary or quinary type of tenants? So there's been a lot more questions than answers around this overall project for White Stadium, this place that was pitched in their expansion bid process to play NWSL games here. And now as 2026 gets closer, there's all these question marks, especially because as part of this plan, they were supposed to break ground on a lot of these initiatives to rehab in early 2025. And winter of 2025 is right around the corner. So there's a back and forth right now. There's litigation going on. There was an attempt to try to push back those dates, but the club is saying that that's going to be a victory for them because that court date is still in place for March. They're positive that things are still going to kind of swing in their favor, essentially, that they want to continue to be good partners. They want to work with the city of Boston to essentially, continue, working on this rehabilitation project and make sure that this all gets underway. But there's all these other kind of contingency plans in place as well that maybe raises some red flags, for this project, that there's already conversations around what it's going to look like in case things get stalled again and again, or if the money around this project continues to balloon. Because at one point you're projecting 50 million. Now it's already, I think, over the 90 million mark. So to go from one number to that number, I think also kind of like makes people a little bit nervous. So there's definitely a wait and see approach, but unfortunately it's within a timeline where there's not a lot of time to wait and see.
The timeline already for Boston is really long, right? The bid that they put in to become the 15th NWSL expansion team was years ago at this point. This has been such a long time coming, and now it feels like at crunch time, it's crumbling. Is the worst case scenario here, Sandra, that they don't start play in 2026? Like, is that possibility on the table?
Yeah, I think that is the worst case scenario. Memory serves me correct. I believe within their expansion bid process that the league does have a role here in eventually being the ultimate deciders of saying we're going to put the brakes on this and pump the brakes on this until you figure things out, essentially. So NWSL Boston, Bos Nation, they have a responsibility now at this point to follow through with their commitment to, after being awarded this expansion franchise. And if they're unable to keep up essentially their end of the bargain, the league can absolutely push back, the table, timeline even further for this club.
Darian, as a player, when you know that an expansion side is coming, right? Even in Boston, a great city, I'm sure a lot of people want to go there and play. How concerned are you with this conversation, the lawsuits that's going on? Or is it too far in the future? You're kind of just like, I'll get through 2025.
Yeah, I think from a player's perspective, it's like, okay, so it's not happening soon. Let's get through 2025 and figure it out. But I think the concern from a player's perspective stems more so from, why is the league approving bids to come in where there's so much gray area and a tight timeline for them to be able to, even though Sandy said they've had the longest, runway up to having a stadium and providing a team. Why are we even doing this? Why aren't we going somewhere where we know as soon as a team comes in, they're going to be set? I think players shouldn't be having to be concerned about, oh God, hey, if I get traded there, if I get picked up in free agency, or if that's the only option I have, what are we going to be in a trailer at the stadium? Or we're going to be having to sharing facilities with collegiate teams? We're professional athletes. So I was kind of rolling my eyes listening and reading all of the articles about this, because I feel, why is the NWSL approving teams when there needs to be more substantial evidence that the city is ready? There needs to be more checks and balances to make sure everything is prepared before it's given there. Because, hey, shout out Philly. I know Philly would love to have a team. They have a bid. I mean, I think there just needs to be a much better process for teams to come into the league. And if they're not ready, let's not give it to them. Let's wait another year, keep building the NWSL, keep filtering players in and out before we bring in ownership and facilities that are not up to par for what these players deserve.
I swear I didn't even pay Darian to say Philly.
But I'm like, Philly's been screaming. Philly's been screaming for a women's team.
Oh,
like,
my goodness.
as Boston has, but have more proper facilities and setups so that players and everybody in the league can feel confident that a team is going there.
A follow-up for you, Darian, because when I saw this part of it, I immediately thought of the players and sort of where they've been and now where they're going. But in a number of these reports, primarily the Boston Globe, mention that this future franchise has considered Nickerson Field as a potential option. We're talking a field at Boston University as a backup plan. And this has been, again, this was part of the maybe contingency plan part of the pitch bid. And so it's like, it's definitely not their plan A, but the possibility that this could be a plan B and or C, where it's like, it's really kind of throwing it back, because this is where like the Breakers at one point found themselves playing. Like, what is that like sort of signal to you as a former player? Like, what are we doing? Does it feel a little bit backwards?
Yeah. And no discredit to BU. I mean, I know it's a great stadium. It's a great field. They have a great crowd. Yeah. But it's a professional effing team. What men's team in any sport would ever consider doing something like this? That the contingency plan is to go play at a collegiate stadium. That is not a thing. Why is it? The way I read that is, I was like, why is it the women always, it's okay, they'll deal with it. The backup plan, the contingency plan to go play at a college stadium. No, That is not good enough. The league, to me, that is backtracking on so much progress that the league has made, but especially with Kansas City coming into the mix and that stadium, you should feel so much pressure to have all of your shit together when you bring a team into the league now. That should have set a new standard.
Before Kansas City built CPKC Stadium, they were playing at Children's Mercy Park, which is a big, huge, beautiful stadium. You look at other expansion sides in Bay FC, they're playing at PayPal Park. Like, that's a great facility too.
It needs to be equivalent to what the men are playing or better. We cannot regress to being back at a collegiate stadium that is not specific for the team, for that sport. That's crazy to me. It's disrespectful to the players. It's disrespectful to how far the league has come. And Boston all around needs to do better. And the league needs to be better about checking everything over to make sure that they are fully prepared to bring a team in when they say they're going to.
They just hired a GM. Like, how much does this affect his ability to try to bring in players at this point?
That's a hard sell. I don't want to go. Like, there's already how many false promises that have failed?
And
I guess we'll see at March.
A lot wrong.
Yeah. I guess March is that deadline for the next court date. So we'll see. Maybe
Sandra, and bringing in that GM and being in the fire right now at Bos Nation, they held a media availability earlier this week with their controlling owner, Jennifer Epstein. Of course, this was supposed to be surrounding their new GM and excitement, right? You don't hold media availability expecting it to be negative, but a lot of questions turned towards this lawsuit. Did we get any answers from the media availability?
No, Epstein was, I tried to make it about the general manager. Unfortunately, when there are this many questions around your franchise, I think you got to try to be a little bit more prepared to field some of those questions, even if they are just sort of your more generic type of answer for that, or say, hey, there is going to be an answer forthcoming on that. They had a statement, out of the decision to uphold that March trial date. So I guess we all need to refer to that, but that's tough when you're trying to progress and move forward and for example, have this press conference with your general manager, but there are still lingering questions around parts of the bid process, the stadium rehabilitation project specifically, and maybe your unwillingness to answer, maybe folks think that that's a sign of not great things. So, I think it puts, to echo Darian, I think it maybe puts that GM in an even more difficult spot to try to make sure that you're building a good team.
It is a business to have a team, to have a women's professional team, and it needs to be treated and respected like one. And right now it's absolutely not, with the lawsuit and the litigation and everything that's coming around Bos Nation right now. Plus the backtracking on their campaign, their name. It feels like they're stepping in a lot of muddy waters.
What could go wrong has gone wrong.
It's been rough. Of course, as news continues to come out about it, updates and statements are made from Bos Nation. Guys, we'll keep you updated as it unfolds.